My name is Thomas Whitmore, and the worst heartbreak of my life didn't happen when I buried my wife. It happened the moment I looked at an empty chair. Hundreds of people filled the grand ballroom, dressed in their finest clothes. Cameras rolled. Reporters whispered into microphones. Giant screens displayed my life's work for everyone to see. But I wasn't watching any of it. My eyes stayed fixed on one single chair in the front row. It carried a silver nameplate, reserved for Ethan Whitmore. Son, empty. No phone call, no apology, no explanation. Only silence. The master of ceremonies noticed where I was looking. Her smile faded for just a second before she leaned toward me. "Mr. Whitmore, would you like us to delay the ceremony a few minutes?" I slowly shook my head. No. What I didn't know was that before this afternoon ended, the entire country would watch another young man walk onto that stage and receive a gift worth $1.25 million. A gift everyone believed should have belonged to my own son. And somewhere nearly 2,000 miles away, Ethan would stare at his television in complete horror, realizing he hadn't simply missed his father's biggest day. He had lost something that could never be bought back. Applause erupted throughout the ballroom as soft music echoed from hidden speakers. The event coordinator gently guided me toward the front row. "Everything is ready, Mr. Whitmore." I forced a smile. "So am I." That wasn't entirely true. No father is ever ready to accept that his own child has chosen somewhere else to be. The convention center overlooked downtown Cincinnati, its towering glass walls glowing beneath the afternoon sunlight. Nearly 500 employees, executives, retirees, community leaders, and local journalists had gathered to celebrate my 42 years of service at Harrison Manufacturing Group. I never wanted a celebration. A simple handshake would have been enough. Instead, they planned television coverage, speeches, videos, and awards that made me feel more uncomfortable than proud. Because none of those things mattered. Only one person mattered, and his chair remained empty. The giant screens suddenly came alive. A younger version of me appeared wearing grease-stained overalls inside a noisy factory nearly 4 decades earlier. The audience laughed softly as another photograph appeared. Me carrying boxes twice my size, smiling like I hadn't a single worry in the world. Then came pictures from charity events, company picnics, volunteer projects, disaster relief drives, retirement celebrations where I'd stood clapping for everyone else. Now everyone was clapping for me, yet every round of applause somehow sounded lonely. My wife, Margaret, should have been sitting beside me. She would have laughed at every embarrassing picture. She would have squeezed my hand every time I looked nervous. She would have whispered, "See, I told you people noticed everything you've done." Instead, cancer had stolen that voice almost 7 years ago. Some mornings I still reached across the bed, expecting to find her there. Grief has strange habits. It teaches your heart to remember what your mind already knows. The slideshow ended. The lights brightened. The audience stood together, filling the ballroom with another thunderous standing ovation. I smiled politely. Inside, I felt completely alone. The host stepped back onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced warmly, "today we celebrate a man whose character has inspired generations." As she continued speaking, I noticed movement near the entrance. For one impossible second, my heart leaped. A young man wearing a dark jacket had stepped through the ballroom doors. He was roughly Ethan's height, the same broad shoulders, the same confident walk. I actually stood halfway from my chair. "He's here," I whispered. The man turned. He wasn't my son, just another guest. I slowly sat back down before anyone noticed, or at least, I hoped they hadn't. Then someone gently called my name from the back of the ballroom. "Mr. Whitmore?" I turned. Standing there was a young man holding a neatly wrapped leather notebook against his chest. His suit wasn't expensive. His shoes had clearly been polished by hand. But the respect in his eyes was worth more than anything money could buy. And in that single moment, I realized the person walking toward me had kept a promise that my own son had forgotten. But when Thomas invites the young man to sit beside him, the entire audience begins asking one question. Who is he, and why does the old man trust him more than his own son? The young man stopped a few feet in front of me, almost as if he wasn't sure he deserved to be there. "Mr. Whitmore," he said softly, "I hope I'm not late?" A genuine smile finally crossed my face. "No, son," I replied. "You came exactly when I needed someone." His shoulders relaxed. "I almost didn't come." "Why?" He looked around the magnificent ballroom filled with executives wearing tailored suits and women dressed in elegant gowns. "I don't belong in places like this." I chuckled quietly. "Neither do I." For the first time that afternoon, he laughed. His name was Noah Bennett. To everyone else in that room, he looked like an ordinary 28-year-old middle school science teacher. To me, he was the last promise I had ever made to my best friend. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Come." He hesitated. "Sir, that seat is reserved for your son." I looked at the empty chair beside mine, then back at Noah. My son made his choice. I paused. I'm making mine. The audience quietly watched as Noah slowly sat beside me. Some executives exchanged puzzled looks. Others whispered among themselves. Nobody understood why I had chosen a schoolteacher to sit in the place reserved for family. They would soon. As the ceremony preparations continued, my thoughts drifted backward nearly 30 years. Back to a neighborhood where children rode bicycles until sunset and neighbors still knew one another by name. That's where I met Samuel Bennett. Most people spend a lifetime searching for one true friend. I found mine during my second week at Harrison Manufacturing. We were assigned to the same production line. The supervisor looked at both of us and laughed. "You two either become brothers or kill each other before Friday." Thankfully, we became brothers. Samuel possessed a rare gift. He could make an entire room laugh within seconds. Even during exhausting 12-hour shifts, he'd crack jokes so ridiculous that we'd forget how tired we were. When my wife Margaret burned dinner. Samuel showed up carrying homemade barbecue when my old truck refused to start during a snowstorm. He spent 6 freezing hours helping me replace the engine. When Ethan was born, Samuel skipped his own fishing trip just to paint the nursery. People often asked if we were related. We always gave the same answer. Not by blood, but by choice. Our families became inseparable. Every summer, we'd rent the same lakeside cabin. Margaret and Samuel's wife, Grace, spent evenings making homemade pies while the children chased fireflies across the yard. Little Ethan and young Noah were almost inseparable. They built tree houses, played baseball until dark, dreamed about becoming engineers like their fathers. Back then, I honestly believed nothing could ever break our families apart. Life has a cruel way of proving that even the strongest foundations can crack. Everything changed one rainy Tuesday morning. The factory was scheduled for routine maintenance. Samuel and I had worked together through hundreds of inspections before. Nothing seemed unusual. Until a deafening explosion ripped through the building. The blast shook the concrete floor beneath us. Metal screamed. Steam filled the air so quickly I couldn't see my own hands. Something heavy struck my shoulder, throwing me against a steel railing. I tried to stand. I couldn't. A massive support beam had trapped my leg beneath twisted machinery. Smoke swallowed everything. The emergency alarms echoed through the building. Workers ran toward the exits. I remember thinking, this is how it ends. Then, through the thick cloud of steam, I heard Samuel's voice. "Tom," I screamed back, "I'm here." He should have kept running. Every safety rule demanded it. Every instinct should have told him to save himself. Instead, he ran back into the collapsing factory, straight toward me. Thomas finally reveals the terrifying sacrifice that changed two families forever, and the dying promise that would one day cost his own son everything. "Tom!" Samuel's voice cut through the smoke like a lifeline. I could barely breathe. The thick black smoke burned my lungs, and every attempt to pull my leg free only sent a sharp wave of pain through my body. "I'm trapped!" I shouted. For one terrifying second, I thought he hadn't heard me. Then his silhouette emerged through the cloud of steam. He should have been outside. The emergency alarms were screaming. Workers were running toward the exits. The building was becoming more unstable with every passing second. Yet Samuel wasn't running away. He was running toward me. "Don't move!" he yelled. I wasn't planning on it, I managed to joke, though my voice trembled. Even then, he laughed. "Still trying to be funny? You started it?" That was Samuel. Even with danger all around us, he somehow found a way to make fear seem smaller. He dropped to one knee beside the twisted steel beam, crushing my leg. Together, we pushed with everything we had. Nothing happened. The beam refused to move. Another explosion echoed somewhere deeper inside the factory. The floor beneath us vibrated. Dust rained from the ceiling. "We're running out of time," I whispered. Samuel looked straight into my eyes. "Not while I'm still breathing." Those words have never left me. He wedged a long steel pipe beneath the beam, using it as a lever. Every muscle in his body strained. Veins bulged across his neck. For several agonizing seconds, nothing. Then, the beam shifted, only an inch, but it was enough. "Now!" he shouted. I pulled with every ounce of strength I had. Pain shot through my leg so fiercely that I nearly blacked out, but somehow I crawled free. Before I could thank him. A deafening crash echoed behind us. A section of the ceiling collapsed exactly where I'd been trapped only moments earlier. Had Samuel hesitated for even a few seconds, neither of us would have survived. He grabbed my arm and practically dragged me toward the emergency exit. By the time we stumbled outside, firefighters were already arriving. I collapsed onto the wet pavement, coughing uncontrollably. Samuel simply sat beside me, breathing heavily. Neither of us spoke. We didn't have to. Sometimes silence says more than words ever can. The doctors later told me something that haunted me for years. Another 30 seconds inside that building. That was all it would have taken. 30 more seconds, and my lungs would have filled with toxic smoke. My heart would have stopped before the rescue crews ever reached me. Samuel never spoke about what he'd done. Whenever someone called him a hero, he'd shrug with that crooked smile of his. "You would have done the same for me." Maybe I would have. Maybe I wouldn't. The truth is, I'll never know, because he never gave me the chance to prove it. Life slowly returned to normal. The factory was rebuilt. Our families kept spending weekends together. Ethan and Noah grew older. Margaret and Grace still insisted on hosting Thanksgiving every year. For a while, it felt like we'd been given a second chance. But life doesn't always warn you before it changes again. 5 years later, Samuel began feeling tired all the time. At first, he blamed the long shifts. Then came the weight loss, the headaches, the endless doctor's appointments. Finally, the diagnosis arrived. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I still remember the expression on Grace's face when the doctor quietly left the room. She wasn't crying. She simply looked lost, like someone had turned off every light in her world. Samuel reached for her hand and smiled. "We've beaten worse." But deep down, we both knew he was lying. The following months became a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy treatments, and whispered prayers. Some days Samuel looked almost like his old self. On other days, the strongest man I'd ever known struggled just to sit upright. Yet he never complained, not once. Instead, he worried about everyone else. He worried about Grace. He worried about Noah. And somehow, he even worried about me. One rainy evening, I walked into his hospital room carrying his favorite chocolate milkshake. He laughed weakly. "The doctor says I shouldn't have sugar." "So don't tell him." He took one sip. "Worth breaking the rules." For a few precious minutes, we forgot he was dying. We talked about football, old fishing trips, our grandchildren that we'd once dreamed would grow up together. Then the room became quiet. Samuel stared out the rain-covered window. "Tom," his voice had become little more than a whisper, "would you do me a favor?" "You don't have to ask." He slowly turned toward me. "If I'm not here?" His eyes filled with tears for the very first time. "Don't let Noah face this world alone." I felt something tighten in my chest. "You have my word." He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "No matter how old he gets? Remind him that his father believed in him." I nodded, unable to speak. "And one more thing." "What is it?" "If he ever loses his way, be the father I won't be here to become." Those words shattered whatever strength I still had. I grabbed his hand with both of mine. "I promise." He smiled, a peaceful, almost relieved smile. "I knew you'd say that." Those were the last complete words Samuel Bennett ever spoke to me. 3 days later. My best friend was gone. His funeral was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. Hundreds of people came, factory workers, teachers, neighbors, former classmates, complete strangers whose lives Samuel had quietly changed over the years. But among all those faces, one broke my heart the most. 19-year-old Noah stood beside his father's casket, greeting every visitor with remarkable courage. He thanked everyone, comforted his mother, even smiled through tears. Yet when the final guest left, I saw him collapse to his knees beside the grave. No cameras, no audience, just a son begging his father not to leave him. And as I stood there watching, I remembered the promise I'd made beside that hospital bed. A promise that, years later, would place Noah in the seat my own son chose to leave empty. Thomas keeps his promise for nearly a decade, while his own son slowly drifts farther away. Then, just 24 hours before the biggest day of Thomas's life, one phone call changes everything and leaves an empty chair waiting for someone who never comes. A promise can change a man's life. Keeping one can define it. After Samuel's funeral, I never tried to replace Noah's father. No one could. A son only gets one father. But I did everything I could to make sure he never felt completely alone. The first few months were the hardest. Grace was drowning in medical bills. Noah worked evenings at a grocery store after attending community college during the day. On weekends, he delivered pizzas until nearly midnight. More than once, I offered to pay his tuition. Every single time, he smiled politely. "I appreciate it, Mr. Whitmore, but Dad taught me to earn my own way." His answer never changed, so instead of giving him money, I looked for quieter ways to help. When his 15-year-old pickup truck finally broke down in the middle of winter, I introduced him to an old mechanic who rebuilt the engine for almost nothing. When he transferred to the State University to study engineering, I connected him with an old friend who rented him a small apartment at half the normal price. When he graduated 4 years later, I sat proudly in the audience, clapping louder than anyone else. After the ceremony, Noah walked over with his diploma tucked under his arm. "You didn't have to come," I smiled. "I wasn't here because I had to. I was here because I promised your father." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he hugged me. It wasn't a long hug, but it carried the gratitude of a young man who had spent years trying not to become a burden to anyone. Life eventually offered Noah something better than engineering. During a volunteer event, he began mentoring children interested in science and robotics. He fell in love with teaching. Many people told him he was wasting his degree. I disagreed. Success isn't measured by how much money you make. Sometimes it's measured by how many lives become better because you showed up. Noah understood that long before most adults ever do. Every Christmas, he mailed me a handwritten card. Every birthday, he called before anyone else. Whenever my gutters overflowed, whenever my furnace refused to start, whenever a heavy snowstorm buried my driveway, I never had to ask for help. Noah simply appeared with a toolbox and a warm smile. "I figured you could use another pair of hands." It became our routine. The strange thing was, He never acted like he was paying back a debt. He behaved as though helping people was simply what decent families did, and every time I looked at him, I saw pieces of Samuel still alive. While Noah was becoming the kind of man his father had dreamed he'd be, something very different was happening with my own son. After Margaret passed away, our home no longer sounded the same. The laughter disappeared. The smell of her fresh bread vanished from the kitchen. Even the old grandfather clock seemed louder in the silence. Grief changes everyone. For me, it made the house feel empty. For Ethan, it slowly pulled him farther away. At first, I told myself it was normal. He had a demanding career, a beautiful home, a busy life with his wife, Vanessa. People grow older, schedules become complicated. I understood that, or at least, I wanted to believe I did. Our weekly dinners quietly became monthly phone calls. Monthly phone calls became short text messages. Dad, I'm swamped this week. Maybe next weekend. We'll plan something soon. Soon became months. Months quietly became years. Sometimes I'd set an extra plate on the dinner table without even realizing it. Old habits are stubborn, especially when they're built around people you love. Birthdays became text messages. Christmas visits lasted less than an hour. Fishing trips stopped completely. Even football Sundays, our favorite tradition since Ethan was 10 years old, simply disappeared. I never confronted him. Love doesn't keep score. At least, it shouldn't. Vanessa wasn't openly disrespectful. She always smiled, always hugged me goodbye, always asked how I was doing. But somehow, every visit felt rushed, like spending time with me had become another appointment squeezed between luxury vacations, business dinners, and social events. If she suggested leaving early, they left early. If she planned a weekend getaway, family plans quietly disappeared. I don't blame everything on her. A husband still makes his own decisions. And somewhere along the way, my son stopped making his. Then, 4 months before my retirement ceremony, Harrison Manufacturing announced something completely unexpected. The board wanted to honor employees who had devoted more than 4 decades to the company. Only one person still qualified. Me. The communications department wanted interviews, old photographs, television coverage, a documentary about my career. Honestly, the attention made me uncomfortable. I would have been perfectly happy with coffee and cake in the employee break room. But our CEO, Charles Donovan, refused to hear it. You've spent 42 years helping build this company, he told me. Now it's our turn to honor the man who helped build us. I finally agreed, mostly because arguing with Charles was impossible. A week later, I drove to Ethan's house carrying the invitation myself. He answered the door wearing golf clothes, a smile spreading across his face. Dad, what brings you here? I thought I'd deliver this in person. He opened the envelope. His eyes widened. They're putting this on television? So they tell me, he laughed. That's incredible. It won't be the same without you there. He looked at the invitation for another moment before wrapping me in a hug. I wouldn't miss it for anything. Those words settled warmly in my heart, because no matter how old your children become, part of you still believes every promise they make. I drove home that afternoon happier than I'd been in months, for the first time since Margaret's passing. I actually looked forward to something. I had no idea. That less than 24 hours before the ceremony. My phone would ring, Ethan's name would appear on the screen, and one ordinary conversation would leave an empty chair waiting in a ballroom full of strangers. Ethan makes a decision that seems small to him, but it shatters his father's heart forever. Meanwhile, Thomas quietly makes one phone call that will change 2 families' lives forever. The invitation remained on Ethan's kitchen counter when I left his house. As I drove home, I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since Margaret passed away. Hope. I imagined Ethan sitting beside me during the ceremony. We'd laugh at the old photographs. I'd introduce him to the young employees who had heard stories about Old Tom. Maybe afterward we'd grab dinner together, just the 2 of us. Nothing fancy, just father and son. Sometimes the smallest dreams are the ones that hurt the most when they disappear. The afternoon before the ceremony, I was trimming the roses Margaret had planted years ago when my phone rang. Ethan. I wiped my hands on an old towel before answering. "Hey, son." His voice sounded unusually cheerful. Too cheerful. "Hi, Dad. Got a minute?" "Always?" There was a brief pause. "So, Vanessa found this amazing last-minute vacation package." I said nothing. It was one of those deals that only lasts a few hours. Oceanfront resort, private beach, everything included. Still, I remained silent. "We leave tomorrow morning." My hand slowly tightened around the phone. Tomorrow morning, the morning of my retirement ceremony. I looked toward the little maple tree Margaret and I had planted the year Ethan started kindergarten. Its branches swayed gently in the evening breeze. For a long moment, I couldn't find the right words. "I thought," I finally said quietly, "you were coming tomorrow." Another silence. Then Ethan spoke quickly. "The ceremony doesn't start until the afternoon, right?" "Yes." "And the flights leave early." I closed my eyes. "You haven't booked them yet?" Another pause. "No." "So you still have a choice." This time the silence lasted much longer. Then I heard Vanessa's voice in the background. "Babe, tell them they'll understand. It's just one ceremony." Ethan lowered his voice. "Dad, we've both been working so hard." "I know. Vanessa really needs this vacation." I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I didn't trust myself to do anything else. "And what about you?" "What do you mean? Do you want to go?" He hesitated. Yeah." His answer was honest, painful, but honest. "I understand." "You do?" "I do." "We'll celebrate together next week," he said quickly. "I'll take you somewhere nice." Somewhere nice. As if 42 years of sacrifice could simply be rescheduled like a dentist appointment. But I didn't tell him that. Instead, I looked at Margaret's favorite flower bed. Many of the roses had begun blooming again. She used to say flowers never argued about the season. They simply bloomed while they had the chance. "I'm 72 years old, Ethan." He laughed nervously. "I guess you've learned not to worry about little things." If only he knew. There was nothing little about this, but hurting him over the phone wouldn't heal my own heart. "It'll be fine," I said. "Thanks, Dad." "We'll talk later." "I love you?" The words came so quickly they almost sounded automatic. I smiled sadly. "I love you too, son." The call ended. The backyard suddenly felt much quieter. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. I remained standing there for several minutes, staring at my phone. Part of me wanted to call him back, to remind him that his mother had dreamed of this day, to tell him I'd spent weeks looking forward to seeing him in that front row seat, to ask him if one vacation was really worth missing, the biggest day of his father's life. But then I remembered something Margaret used to tell me whenever Ethan disappointed us as a teenager. "Never speak while your heart is bleeding. Give your love time to become wisdom." She was almost always right. So, I didn't call him back. I didn't send a guilt-filled message. I didn't try to change his mind. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found another name. Noah Bennett. He answered before the second ring. "Mr. Whitmore, is everything okay?" "I hope I'm not interrupting dinner." "Not at all." "I have a favor to ask." There wasn't even a second of hesitation. "Anything." That single word tightened my throat. "My retirement ceremony is tomorrow." "I remember." "My son's not coming." Silence, not the uncomfortable kind, the compassionate kind. "I'm sorry." "I was wondering—" I paused, suddenly unsure how to ask. "Would you sit beside me?" Another brief silence followed. Then Noah spoke so softly I almost missed it. "You want me there?" "I do." His voice cracked with emotion. "It would be one of the greatest honors of my life." No excuses, no checking his calendar, no asking how long it would take, no wondering what he'd get in return. Just gratitude. Pure and simple. A warmth spread through my chest that had been missing all afternoon. "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me." "I do." He laughed gently. "My dad would have never forgiven me if I said no." Neither of us spoke for a moment. Finally, I whispered, "He'd be incredibly proud of the man you've become." There was another long silence. When Noah answered, his voice trembled. I've spent years hoping someone would tell me that. That evening, I carefully ironed my navy blue suit. Margaret had bought it for our 40th wedding anniversary. She'd teased me for refusing to spend money on myself. "You've worn the same jackets since the 90s. I like them. They're falling apart. They're comfortable." She'd rolled her eyes before secretly buying me the nicest suit I'd ever owned. As I straightened my tie in the bedroom mirror, my eyes drifted toward her framed photograph resting on the dresser. She was smiling exactly the way she always had. Warm, patient, full of quiet strength. I picked up the frame. "I wish you were here tomorrow." The room offered no reply, yet somehow I felt less alone. Early the next morning, I climbed into my old pickup and began driving toward the convention center. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. I tried convincing myself everything would be all right, that Ethan might still surprise me. Maybe he'd cancel the trip. Maybe he'd arrive just before the ceremony. Maybe. Hope can be a beautiful thing, but sometimes it's also the slowest kind of heartbreak. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed someone already waiting near the entrance. A young man wearing a carefully pressed charcoal gray suit stood holding a small gift bag. The moment he saw my truck, he smiled. Noah had arrived nearly an hour early. Neither of us knew that before the day ended, one unexpected announcement would leave an entire ballroom in stunned silence, and a son thousands of miles away would desperately wish he had chosen a different flight. Thomas steps onto the stage, believing the ceremony is almost over. But the CEO has one final surprise that no one, not even Thomas, knows about, and it will change Noah's life forever. Noah straightened his tie as I climbed out of my truck. "I think I got here a little too early," he said with a nervous grin. I laughed. I've spent 42 years teaching people that being early is never a bad habit. He held out the small gift bag he'd been carrying. "This is for you." "You didn't have to bring me anything." "I know, but I wanted to." Inside the bag was a simple leather journal, its cover embossed with a small compass. When I opened it, I found only one handwritten sentence on the first page. "A successful career earns respect. A generous heart earns a legacy." For several seconds, I couldn't speak. I ran my fingers over the words, blinking back the tears that threatened to escape. "Noah? I wasn't sure if you'd like it." I closed the journal carefully. "I'll treasure it for the rest of my life." He smiled. "My dad always said gifts don't have to be expensive. They just have to be honest." I nodded. He was a wise man. For a brief moment, it felt as though Samuel was standing there with us, smiling the way he always had. Then the ballroom doors opened. It was time. The ballroom looked even more magnificent than I remembered. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm golden light across hundreds of round tables dressed in white linen. Large television cameras quietly rolled into position. Nearly 500 guests filled the room. Factory workers, retired supervisors, young apprentices, city officials, business leaders, former employees who had traveled from different states. Everyone had gathered for one reason: to celebrate an ordinary man who had simply shown up to work every day for more than 4 decades. Noah walked beside me, but I could tell he felt out of place. His eyes kept drifting toward the executives seated near the stage. "You all right?" I whispered. He smiled nervously. "I've taught classrooms full of teenagers." I chuckled. "And this scares you?" "They don't wear $1,000 suits." I laughed softly. "Trust me. They're much easier to impress than teenagers." That finally made him laugh. The tension eased. As we reached the front row, my eyes immediately found it. The empty chair. The silver nameplate still rested against its back, reserved for Ethan Whitmore for just one foolish second. I checked the entrance again. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe he'd driven through the night. Maybe he'd surprise me after all. Every father keeps believing in miracles long after he should stop expecting them. But the doors never opened. The chair remained empty. Noah quietly noticed where I was looking. Without saying a word, he placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. That simple gesture somehow hurt and healed at exactly the same time. At 2 o'clock sharp, the lights dimmed. The conversations faded into silence. 3 enormous screens illuminated the stage. A familiar face appeared. Mine, only much younger. The audience laughed as photographs from decades ago filled the screens. There I was at 29 years old, covered in grease after repairing an assembly line. Another photograph showed Margaret smiling beside me at our first company Christmas party. She wore a simple emerald green dress she'd insisted wasn't expensive. To me, she looked more beautiful than anyone else in the room. The next picture showed Ethan as a little boy wearing an oversized safety helmet during family day at the factory. He couldn't have been older than 7. I remembered exactly what he'd whispered that afternoon. "One day I'm going to work with you, Dad." The memory tightened something deep inside my chest. Life has a strange way of changing dreams without asking permission. The slideshow continued. Volunteer projects, community fundraisers, snowstorms, overnight shifts. 42 years compressed into 6 short minutes. The audience erupted into applause. I wasn't thinking about promotions or awards or recognition. I was remembering every birthday I'd celebrated late because of overtime. Every anniversary Margaret had quietly postponed because another machine had broken down. Every sacrifice we made, believing we were building something that would one day matter. The host stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is our privilege to honor a man whose integrity has inspired generations." Another standing ovation echoed through the ballroom. Then she welcomed our CEO, Charles Donovan. Charles wasn't born into wealth. He had started sweeping warehouse floors while attending night classes. That's one reason we'd always respected each other. Neither of us had forgotten where we came from. He adjusted the microphone and smiled at me. "I've worked beside Thomas Whitmore for 33 years, he paused. "And in all those years, I've never once questioned whether he'd do the right thing." The room grew quiet. "Sometimes," Charles continued, "doing the right thing cost Tom opportunities." I frowned slightly. We hadn't discussed this part. He turned down executive promotions because accepting them would have required moving his family across the country. A few people looked surprised. Charles smiled. He believed being present for the people he loved mattered more than another title. My thoughts immediately drifted to Ethan. The irony wasn't lost on me. One executive after another came forward. A maintenance supervisor described how I'd stayed overnight during a blizzard so younger employees wouldn't risk driving home. A receptionist shared the story of how someone had secretly paid for her husband's wheelchair after his accident. She never knew it was me until years later. An apprentice told the audience I'd spent 6 months mentoring him after everyone else had given up on him. Listening to those stories felt almost uncomfortable. Not because they weren't true, because I'd never done those things expecting anyone to remember. Kindness isn't meant to become a performance. It's meant to become a habit. Finally, Charles looked toward me and smiled. "Thomas, would you join me on stage?" The applause shook the ballroom as I slowly walked toward the podium. He handed me a crystal award engraved with my name. 42 years. The weight of it felt heavier than the glass itself. "You've earned every single day," Charles whispered. I thanked him and prepared to return to my seat. I truly believed the ceremony was over. Then, Charles spoke again. "Actually," he smiled mysteriously, "we have one final surprise." I stopped walking, confused. I hadn't been told about any surprise. The audience leaned forward. Charles reached inside a sealed envelope resting on the podium. His expression became unusually serious. Then he looked directly at me. "Thomas, do you remember a letter you wrote to this company almost 15 years ago?" My heart skipped a beat. A letter? I searched my memory, but before I could answer. Charles unfolded the document, and the first sentence he read aloud instantly brought tears to my eyes. Charles reveals a secret Thomas had almost forgotten, a decision he made 15 years earlier that quietly grew into a life-changing gift worth over $1 million. But when the first recipient's name is announced, the entire ballroom falls silent. And somewhere far away, Ethan's world begins to collapse. The ballroom became so quiet that I could hear the faint hum of the television cameras. 500 people sat frozen in their seats. Charles Donovan unfolded the yellowed letter with extraordinary care, as though he were holding something far more valuable than paper. He looked at me and smiled. "You probably don't even remember writing this." I gave a small shrug. "After 42 years, there are plenty of things I've forgotten." Soft laughter rippled across the room. Charles adjusted his glasses before reading aloud. "Money can disappear in a single generation. Character can inspire generations that haven't even been born. If I ever have the opportunity, I'd rather invest in people than collect another bonus." The room fell silent again. I closed my eyes. Now I remembered. 15 years earlier, the board had offered me a generous executive retention package after another manufacturing company tried to recruit me away. Instead of accepting the money, I'd made a different request. I had asked them to create a small fund that could someday help ordinary people who quietly served others. Back then, I imagined a scholarship worth maybe $20,000 or $30,000. Nothing more. Charles folded the letter carefully. Most people believed Tom's idea would never amount to much. He smiled. But something remarkable happened. The giant screens behind him lit up with photographs, old board meetings, charity events, retired executives, young apprentices. The company continued contributing. Former employees donated. Private investors added to the fund. And every single year, the investments quietly grew. I stared at him, genuinely confused. No one had updated me in years. I'd assumed the project had faded away. Charles looked around the ballroom. Today, that original dream has become something much bigger. He paused. So much bigger. That the Legacy Character Fund has reached $1,250,000. A wave of astonished gasps swept through the audience. Some people actually looked at one another to make sure they'd heard correctly. Even I couldn't believe it. I leaned closer to the microphone. "Charles, I had no idea." He smiled warmly. "That's because you never asked." The audience laughed softly. "You trusted us. And today, it's finally time to fulfill your original vision." Charles lifted another envelope from the podium. "This fund has one condition." Everyone leaned forward. "The first recipient must be personally chosen by Thomas Whitmore." Every camera immediately turned toward me. I suddenly understood why Charles had kept everything secret. He wasn't honoring my career. He was honoring the values I'd tried to live by. He looked at me. "Tom, years ago you submitted a name. I've kept that sealed in our archives ever since." My heartbeat quickened. I had written that name shortly after Samuel's death. I hadn't thought about it in years. Charles slowly opened the envelope. The audience held its breath. He smiled before speaking. "The first Legacy Character Award goes to..." He paused. "Mr. Noah Bennett." For a moment, nothing happened. No applause, no whispers, only complete silence. Noah looked around the ballroom in confusion, almost as if he expected someone else to stand. Charles smiled. "Noah, would you please join us on stage?" Noah slowly rose from his chair. His knees visibly trembled. There has to be some mistake." "There isn't," Charles replied gently. The audience finally erupted into applause. Within seconds, every person inside the ballroom was standing. Many were wiping tears from their eyes. I watched Noah slowly walk toward the stage. He looked completely overwhelmed, almost frightened. When he reached us, he shook his head. "I can't accept this." Charles smiled kindly. "You already have." Noah turned toward me. His eyes searched mine for answers. "Mr. Whitmore? Why me?" I stepped closer and placed both hands on his shoulders. "Because 20 years ago? Your father gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." He swallowed hard. "He saved my life." My voice began to shake. "And after he was gone, you spent every single year honoring the man who raised you." I looked directly into his eyes. "You never chased recognition. You never expected rewards. You simply kept showing up." The tears Noah had been fighting finally escaped. "I was only trying to make my dad proud." I smiled through tears of my own. "You already have." The ballroom exploded into another standing ovation. Some people were openly crying. Others embraced the coworkers beside them. Several television reporters lowered their cameras for a moment, wiping away tears before continuing to film. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the kind of man Noah had become. Charles handed Noah a beautifully crafted presentation box containing the official award certificate. Then he quietly added something no one expected. "The financial gift will be transferred immediately." Noah stared at him, his lips parted. "You mean," Charles nodded, "the full $1.25 million. The room erupted once again. Noah covered his face with both hands. His shoulders shook uncontrollably. "I've never even seen that much money." Charles laughed softly. "Very few people have." Noah turned back toward me. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have?" "How? You honored a promise?" I smiled. "And in doing so?" "You honored your father." Several reporters began snapping photographs as flashes lit up the ballroom. Television cameras zoomed in on Noah's tear-filled face. But there was one camera angle no one inside that room noticed. The live broadcast had quietly shown something else. The empty chair, the silver nameplate, the seat reserved for my son. Thousands of viewers watching from home had noticed it, including one man relaxing beside a luxury resort swimming pool hundreds of miles away. Ethan Whitmore, as his phone suddenly exploded with messages. He looked up at the giant outdoor television just in time to hear the reporter say, "The man receiving this extraordinary gift isn't Thomas Whitmore's son. He's the young man who never stopped showing up when his own family stopped calling." The smile disappeared from Ethan's face. His drink slipped from his hand and shattered against the stone beside the pool. For the very first time, he realized the empty chair the whole country had seen was the one he had chosen to leave behind. Ethan rushes home believing he can still fix everything, but Thomas has already learned a painful truth. Forgiveness may be given freely, but trust must be earned. The emotional reunion will change every life forever. The crystal glass slipped from Ethan's hand. It shattered across the stone tiles surrounding the resort pool. He didn't even notice. His eyes remained locked on the giant outdoor television. "The young man receiving the Legacy Character Award isn't Thomas Whitmore's son," the reporter continued. "He's the son of Thomas's late best friend, a young man who, according to everyone who knows him, never stopped showing up." Guests around the pool began whispering. Some recognized Ethan from the live broadcast. Others glanced between the television and the man standing frozen beside it. Then his phone vibrated. Once, twice, again. Within seconds, it became impossible to count. Friends, coworkers, former classmates, relatives, even people he hadn't spoken to in years. Every notification carried the same message. "Was that empty chair yours? Why weren't you there for your dad? I can't believe you missed something so important." His stomach tightened. Vanessa walked over carrying 2 towels. "What's going on?" He silently pointed toward the television. She watched as another clip replayed. The empty chair, Noah standing beside his father. The announcement of the $1.25 million gift. the standing ovation. Then came the reporter's final sentence. Sometimes family isn't defined by blood, but by the people who choose to stay. Vanessa folded her arms. This is getting blown way out of proportion. Ethan slowly turned toward her. Is it? She frowned. It was one ceremony. No. His voice barely rose above a whisper. It wasn't. He looked back at the screen. It was my father's biggest day. For the first time in years. He stopped defending himself. Meanwhile, I quietly left the convention center after everyone had gone home. The applause had faded. The cameras were gone. Only silence remained. Exactly the kind of silence I'd grown used to after Margaret died. Noah insisted on following me home. I just want to make sure you get there safely. I smiled. You've become as stubborn as your father. I've heard that before. When we reached my little ranch house, he parked behind my truck. We stood together in the driveway as the evening sun disappeared behind the trees. So, I asked, what are you going to do now? He looked thoughtful. Honestly? I don't know. I've never imagined having that kind of money. You'll figure it out. He nodded. I do know one thing. What? I want every kid in my robotics program to have the opportunities I never had. I smiled proudly. That sounds exactly like your father. And maybe, he laughed nervously, I'll finally replace my old truck? I couldn't help laughing. I was wondering when you'd admit that. Then his expression became serious. Mr. Whitmore? Yes? My dad earned this. I shook my head. He opened the first door. I placed my hand on his shoulder. You chose to keep walking. His eyes filled with tears once more. Before leaving, he hugged me. Not out of obligation, not because cameras were watching, simply because he cared. That was the kind of young man Noah Bennett had become. The house felt strangely quiet after he left. I loosened my tie, placed my crystal award beside Margaret's photograph. Then I looked at her smiling face. You would have loved today. The room remained silent, but somehow I felt as though she'd heard me. Then my phone began vibrating. Again, again, again. I frowned. Unknown number. Another call. Unknown number. Then Ethan. Then Vanessa. Then Ethan again. The screen filled faster than I could read. When the ringing finally stopped, I counted them. 143 missed calls. I stared at the number for several seconds. Then the phone rang again. Ethan. This time, I answered. Hi, son. His breathing was uneven, almost panicked. Dad? Yes? I'm at the airport. I thought you were on vacation. We're leaving. You don't have to. No. His voice cracked. I do. Silence settled between us. Finally he whispered, Why didn't you tell me? I looked around my quiet kitchen. Tell you what? About the award. I knew there would be recognition. I didn't know the amount. You never mentioned anything. You never asked. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Finally he spoke again. I should have been there. Yes? I'm so sorry. I closed my eyes. For the first time all day, his apology sounded real. Not because cameras were rolling, not because people were talking, because his heart had finally caught up with his choices. Then Vanessa suddenly took the phone. Thomas. Hello, Vanessa. I think people are being unfair. How so? They're making Ethan look like some horrible son. I haven't spoken to anyone. I know, but that empty chair... What about it? It embarrassed us. I took a slow breath. No, she sounded confused. What do you mean? It didn't embarrass you. It revealed you. Silence. You invited us. Yes. We chose not to come. Yes. So whose decision was that? She couldn't answer. Instead, she spoke more sharply. People think Noah deserved that money more than Ethan, I answered honestly. They think that because Noah was there. Another silence. Then she asked the question I'd been expecting. "So? You replaced your own son?" I looked toward Margaret's photograph. "No." My voice remained calm. "My son replaced himself." The line went completely silent. A moment later, Ethan took the phone back. "Dad, I'm coming home. I'll be here. I love you." Those words hit me harder than I expected. He hadn't said them with sincerity in a very long time. "I love you too, son." 2 hours later, headlights turned into my driveway. A black SUV stopped outside my house. Ethan climbed out first. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes were swollen from crying. Vanessa stepped out behind him. Unlike Ethan, she wasn't carrying regret. She was carrying frustration. Ethan slowly walked toward the porch. He stopped just before reaching the front door. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then, without warning, my 74-year-old son dropped to his knees on the wooden porch. Tears streamed down his face. "I'm sorry, Dad. I forgot what mattered. I kept believing there would always be another birthday, another dinner, another chance." His voice broke completely. "But today, I realized, one day there won't be." My own eyes filled with tears. I stepped forward, not to lecture him, not to shame him, but to help him stand, because that's what fathers do, even when their hearts have been broken. I wrapped my arms around him. He cried like the little boy who used to run into my arms after scraping his knees. And for the first time since Margaret died, I truly felt my son had come home. Months passed. The headlines slowly disappeared. The television interviews ended. Life became wonderfully ordinary again. Ethan started calling every morning, not because he wanted anything, simply to ask, "How are you today, Dad?" Soon those phone calls became Sunday breakfasts. Sunday breakfasts became fishing trips. Fishing trips became afternoons repairing old fences that didn't really need repairing. One afternoon he laughed and admitted, "The fence wasn't broken. I just wanted an excuse to spend time with you." I smiled. I've been waiting years to hear that. As for Noah, he used nearly half of the award to create scholarships for students interested in engineering, robotics, and skilled trades. The rest he invested wisely, ensuring he could continue teaching without worrying about money. When reporters asked why he hadn't bought a mansion or a luxury sports car, he smiled. "My father taught me that wealth isn't measured by what you keep. It's measured by what you leave behind." Months later, Harrison Manufacturing invited me back for the opening of the Whitmore Legacy Mentorship Program, inspired by the same values that created the Legacy Character Fund. This time, when I walked into the auditorium, the seat beside mine wasn't empty. Ethan was already there. He stood as soon as he saw me. "I wanted to make sure I got here early." I smiled. "You certainly did. I'm never missing another one." Noah sat on my other side. One son connected to me by blood, the other connected by a promise. Looking at both of them, I realized something Margaret had understood long before I ever did. Family isn't defined by DNA. Family is built every single day by the people who choose to show up. And sometimes, the greatest inheritance a parent can leave behind isn't money. It's the example of a life lived with kindness, humility, and unconditional love. If this story touched your heart, don't wait for a birthday, holiday, or funeral to tell someone how much they mean to you. Time is the one gift no amount of money can ever buy back. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories about family, redemption, sacrifice, and the quiet power of choosing love over pride. 1 year passed. The television interviews stopped. The headlines disappeared. The internet moved on to newer stories. But real life doesn't end when the cameras are turned off. Sometimes, that's where the most important chapters begin. Saturday mornings became my favorite part of the week again. Almost every weekend, Ethan arrived before 8 o'clock carrying 2 cups of coffee. He never knocked anymore. He simply walked through the front door like he used to when he was a teenager. "I'm here, Dad." 3 simple words. Yet every time I heard them, my heart smiled. Some Saturdays we'd repair something around the house. Other days we'd sit on the back porch watching birds gather near Margaret's old flower garden. Sometimes we didn't even talk. We simply enjoyed being together. Funny how silence feels completely different when you're no longer lonely. One chilly autumn morning, Ethan pulled another surprise from the back of his truck. 2 fishing rods. I laughed. "You've become predictable." "I learned from the best." We drove to the same little lake where I'd taught him to fish nearly 40 years earlier. The wooden dock leaned slightly to one side now. The paint had faded. The benches had been replaced. Everything else felt exactly the same. We cast our lines into the still water. For nearly 20 minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I used to think success meant having the biggest house." I looked toward him. "The nicest vacations. The newest car." He shook his head. "I spent years chasing things, while ignoring the people who gave me everything." I let him finish. "I kept believing you'd always be there." He swallowed hard. "I confused your patience with permission." Those words settled over the lake like morning mist. After another long silence, he looked at me. "Do you think you'll ever completely trust me again?" I smiled gently. "I already forgive you." "I know. But trust?" I reeled in my fishing line before answering. "Trust isn't rebuilt with one apology. It's rebuilt with ordinary days." He nodded slowly. "So? I'll keep showing up." I smiled. "I know you will." Across town. Noah's life had changed in ways none of us expected. The Legacy Character Award had opened doors he'd never imagined, but instead of changing who he was, it simply gave him the resources to become even more of the man his father had hoped he'd become. Half of the award established scholarships for students pursuing engineering, robotics, welding, and skilled trades. Another portion funded after-school science programs in neighborhoods where children rarely had opportunities like those. He quietly purchased new computers, modern robotics equipment, 3D printers, safety tools. Whenever reporters asked why he hadn't bought a mansion or an expensive sports car, he'd smile. "My father taught me something. Wealth isn't measured by what you own. It's measured by how many people stand taller because you believed in them." That quote quickly spread across social media. Thousands shared it, but Noah never chased attention. He kept teaching, kept mentoring, kept showing up, exactly as he always had. One afternoon, Ethan surprised me again. "Dad, I'd like to meet Noah." I looked at him carefully. "You've already seen him?" "I mean properly. Face to face." A few days later, we visited the high school where Noah taught. The robotics lab buzzed with excitement. Teenagers gathered around workbenches covered with gears, circuit boards, laptops, and half-built robots. The room felt alive. One little girl approached us, holding a tiny robotic arm she'd built herself. "Mr. Bennett says you're the reason we have all this." I smiled and gently shook my head. "No," I pointed toward Noah. "He's the reason." She looked confused. "But he says you taught him generosity." Noah overheard our conversation. He smiled across the classroom. Neither of us needed to say another word. Some lessons don't require speeches. They simply require examples. As the students left for the day, Ethan quietly walked over to Noah. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Ethan extended his hand. "I owe you an apology." Noah looked surprised. "For what?" "For showing my father less kindness than you did." Noah immediately shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." "I do." Ethan's voice trembled. "I spent years believing being family was enough." He looked down at the floor. "You reminded me that love has to be lived." Noah smiled warmly. "Your father never stopped believing you'd figure that out." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I almost proved him wrong. Without another word, Noah pulled him into a hug, not the awkward handshake of strangers, the genuine embrace of two men who understood pain and forgiveness. Watching them together, I silently thanked Samuel. Somewhere, I hoped he was smiling. A month later, Harrison Manufacturing invited me back once more. This time, there were no television cameras, no reporters, no dramatic surprises. Only a room filled with young apprentices beginning the first day of their careers. Charles Donovan stood beside me. The Whitmore Legacy Mentorship Program officially begins today. More than 100 experienced employees had volunteered to mentor young workers entering the skilled trades. The company had decided that my greatest contribution hadn't been fixing machines. It had been helping people. As I walked onto the stage, I looked toward the front row. This time, there wasn't one occupied seat beside me. There were two. Ethan sat on my right, Noah sat on my left, one connected to me by blood, the other connected by a promise. Charles smiled. "Tom, looks like your family came." I looked at both young men, then smiled. "They've been here all along." The audience applauded softly, not because of money, not because of awards, but because everyone understood something that had taken my son years to learn. The greatest inheritance a parent can leave behind isn't wealth, it isn't property, it isn't success. It's character. Character lives far longer than any paycheck ever could. And that, more than any award I ever received, was the legacy I hoped would continue long after I was gone. 5 years later, the little white house on Maple Street looked almost exactly the same. Margaret's rose garden still bloomed every spring. The old wind chime she had insisted on buying still danced gently whenever the evening breeze passed through the porch. My favorite rocking chair still creaked in the same familiar rhythm. Only one thing had truly changed. The house no longer felt lonely. Almost every Sunday afternoon, laughter echoed through the backyard again. Sometimes it came from Ethan, sometimes from Noah. Most often, it came from children, dozens of them. The Whitmore Legacy Foundation, created from Noah's scholarship program and supported by Harrison Manufacturing, had grown far beyond anything any of us imagined. Every summer, students from struggling families gathered in my backyard for what they lovingly called Grandpa Tom's Legacy Day. Some dreamed of becoming engineers. Others wanted to become teachers, mechanics, electricians, nurses, or business owners. Their dreams were all different, but every single one of them had something in common. Someone had believed in them. Watching those young faces reminded me of another little boy. A boy wearing an oversized safety helmet at a factory family day many years ago. A boy who once believed his father could fix anything. Life had taught us both otherwise. One bright Saturday morning, Noah arrived carrying a thick blue folder. "You've got to see this." "What is it?" "The newest scholarship reports." He opened the folder across my kitchen table. There are now 83 students attending college because of the Legacy Fund. I slowly adjusted my reading glasses. 83? Noah smiled proudly. And 16 graduates have already come back to become mentors. I looked up at him. They came back? They said someone once opened a door for them. He paused. So now they want to hold that door open for someone else. A lump formed in my throat. That was exactly what Samuel would have wanted. Money can disappear. Buildings eventually crumble. Even names fade with time. But kindness has a remarkable way of multiplying long after we're gone. Later that afternoon, another familiar truck pulled into the driveway. Ethan climbed out carrying a toolbox. I laughed. "The fence isn't broken this time," he smiled. "I know." "What are we fixing?" He looked around the yard before answering. "Nothing?" I raised an eyebrow. "I just wanted to spend the day with you." 5 years earlier, those words would have sounded impossible. Now, they had become wonderfully ordinary. We spent hours replacing old porch boards that honestly could have lasted another decade. We grilled hamburgers, argued about baseball, laughed over stories Margaret used to tell. At one point, Ethan quietly looked toward Noah, who was teaching a group of children how to build small robotic cars in the backyard. "You know." I used to be jealous of him. I nodded. "I know." "I thought you loved him more." I laid my hammer down. "No. I loved him differently." He looked at me, waiting. "You were my son." He became a promise. I smiled gently. A father's heart isn't divided when it loves another child. It simply grows larger. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan quietly whispered, "Thank you for never giving up on me." I reached over and squeezed his shoulder. Parents don't stop loving their children. Sometimes they simply wait for them to find their way home. A few weeks later, I asked Ethan and Noah to meet me somewhere special. Neither of them knew why. The morning sky was covered with soft gray clouds as we walked together through the peaceful cemetery. Birds sang from nearby oak trees. Fresh flowers rested beside many of the headstones. Eventually, we stopped in front of Margaret's grave. Her polished granite marker reflected the morning sunlight. Beneath her name were the words she had chosen herself years before she passed. "Love is measured by what we give away." Ethan slowly knelt. "I'm sorry, Mom," his voice cracked. "I wasted so many years." A gentle breeze moved through the trees. No one spoke. No one needed to. Some apologies are heard even when no answer comes. Then Noah stepped forward carrying a bouquet of white roses. He carefully placed them beside the headstone. "I never got the chance to thank you," he whispered, "but thank you for sharing your husband with me after my dad was gone." Tears filled my eyes. Margaret would have loved hearing those words. She never once questioned why Noah spent so much time at our house. She always made an extra plate at dinner, always bought an extra Christmas present, always reminded me, "That boy lost one parent. Let's make sure he never feels like he's lost another family." Even after all these years, she was still teaching us. As we turned to leave the cemetery, Ethan suddenly stopped. "Dad." "Yes?" "If Noah hadn't been there, if he hadn't kept showing up," he swallowed hard, "I don't think I would have understood what kind of man I was becoming." Noah smiled. "I wasn't trying to teach you anything. I was just trying to honor my father." Ethan nodded. "And because you honored him, you helped save me too." Without hesitation, the two men embraced. This time, there was no guilt, no jealousy, no comparisons, only gratitude. Watching them together felt like watching two broken branches grow from the same tree. Different stories. One family. That evening, we returned to the backyard one last time. The children had gone home. The sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. Golden light covered the old rocking chairs on the porch. I looked at Ethan, then Noah, then toward the empty chair that had remained beside mine since Margaret passed away. For years, that chair had reminded me of loss. Now, it reminded me of hope. Because empty chairs don't always stay empty. Sometimes, people find their way back. Sometimes, families heal. Sometimes, love quietly wins. I smiled. You both know, one day this old house will belong to someone else. Ethan immediately interrupted. "Dad, we're not talking about that." I laughed. "Just listen." They both nodded. I looked around the yard one final time. The greatest inheritance I can leave behind isn't this house. It isn't my savings. It isn't the awards hanging on the wall. I placed one hand on Ethan's shoulder, the other on Noah's. It's this: the decision to keep showing up, to forgive, to protect one another, to love even when it's difficult. If you pass those things to your children, and they pass them to theirs, then a part of us will never truly die. Neither man could hold back his tears. Neither could I. As darkness settled over the backyard, We sat together talking until the stars filled the sky. No reporters, no cameras, no applause, just a father. And the two young men who had become his greatest blessing. In the end, I finally understood something that had taken me an entire lifetime to learn. A legacy isn't measured by the money you leave behind. It's measured by the hearts that become kinder because you lived. So if you're watching this today, don't wait for a special occasion to call your father, your mother, your grandfather, or someone who once believed in you. Life changes faster than we expect. A missed phone call can become years of regret. A single visit can become someone's favorite memory. And sometimes, the most valuable gift you'll ever give another person is simply showing up. Thank you for staying until the very end of this journey. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone you love. Subscribe for more unforgettable stories of family, redemption, sacrifice, and hope. Because every family has a story. And sometimes the quietest ones leave the deepest legacy.